Hello, and welcome to another hellacious episode of Furries in the Media, the series that reviews video clips and other media based on how the furry fandom is represented. Today, we'll take a look at an episode of Lucifer from late in Season 3 called Boo Normal. Since most of the episode doesn't entirely focus on furries, I'll provide some context to try and bring y'all up to speed. Beth, a child psychologist, has been murdered, and it's up to Ella and Chloe to figure out who done it and why. On the first pass of the crime scene, some unusual fibers are found under the victim's fingernails, and Ella takes the fibers back to the lab to determine their origin. While there, Ella's childhood ghost friend, Ray Ray, shows back up in her life. The fibers turn out to be synthetic fibers like the ones found in carpets or plush toys. Ray Ray tags along with Ella and Chloe as they do a second sweep of the crime scene to find the source of the fibers. Those fibers couldn't possibly come from a fursuit, not in the one furry episode of this show. Well, let's see for ourselves, Sam.
Look what I found.
What is that? Like a mascot?
No, it's a furry suit. I know, furries get a bad rap, but they're almost never sexual. I mean, most of the time, totally wholesome. If that's what you were thinking.
Oh no! Oh, that is so painfully accurate. I've seen so many furries do exactly that when the topic of furry is brought up. Hell, I've been guilty of doing that too. Why do furries do that? I think it's a sort of defensive reflex because we furries often assume that people have already heard that misconception and we feel the need to set the record straight. This may or may not be somewhat relevant to why I started this channel, but in any case, this is not a good first reflex. There's every possibility that the person asking about furries knows nothing about it, but now their first impression is hearing someone get defensive about how it's not a sex thing, which defeats the instinct of wanting to defend the furry fandom in the first place. I will admit, it's refreshing to see a non-furry character have a similar reaction when they're put on the spot like that. The fact that the show included her defensive reaction seems in itself to be a reflection of current mainstream awareness of what a furry is, and that if nothing else, the mainstream is aware that furry is not only about sex. But if this were a real situation, I think it would have been better for her to not mention sex at all. What should furries do in a situation like that? Just stick to defining furries as people who are fans of cartoon animals, like Bugs Bunny or Zootopia. Don't bring up sex unless they do, because chances are they weren't even thinking about it in the first place. One thing I noticed about the scene, there are sewing supplies in the shoe organizer on the closet door. That's some really good attention to detail for the prop placement.
Do you think Beth made her own fursuit?
I think it's a likely possibility, but we don't definitively know that she did. But I know one thing for sure, that fursuit has never seen a brush. Seriously, there should be a brush somewhere in those sewing supplies.
I'm thinking that's a big stain.
$100 is ketchup.
That's a huge stain. Why on earth didn't she clean it out of her suit? Abby, she didn't even have a brush. Why would she clean a ketchup stain? Good point. It's never explained how important the suit was for Beth, but most fursuit owners take really good care of their suits, because keeping a fursuit clean isn't just as simple as tossing it into the washing machine. I have a hard time believing that the average fursuit owner would just let a ketchup stain go uncleaned like that. My guess is either Beth didn't know or didn't care to know how to clean her suit. But I think the real explanation is that leaving the stain on the suit allows the story to flow smoothly, rather than having to take a detour to do some fantasy forensics to find that ketchup stain in the first place.
How would you clean up such a stain?
Spot clean with cold water and a very mild detergent as soon as possible, then let it drip dry and give it a good brushing afterwards.
Listen to this.
That's it, Beth. I'm gonna be the only one with Wesley tomorrow night at SCC. He's mine. This ends now.
She's threatened much?
Yeah, Beth and this woman were fighting over some guy named Wesley. It's a solid motive, but I checked the number. It's blocked.
How much you want to bet Wesley is a stolen persona? Yeah, that would be funny, but I don't know that's the case here.
Well, why not?
So far, the show seems to be ticking all the right boxes when it comes to furries, but I feel like including furry drama over a stolen persona might be a bit too niche. They might risk losing their audience's interest if they did that. Then again, they did have Ella do the thing where she defended furries the second someone else mentioned it, which feels like an awkwardly furry-specific thing to include.
Sure you don't want to bet?
You know what, Sam? You're on. The establishing shots of the furry convention not only feature real fursuiters, but it looks like they got footage of a fursuit parade. Now, was this footage gathered from a real furry convention? I kind of doubt it was. I'm just impressed they got that many actual fursuiters together. Too many, if you ask me. Well, yeah, you do have a point, Sam. I think the fursuiters here are overrepresented, even by furry convention standards. For a comparison, Anthrocon 2019 saw 9,358 attendees, only 2,132 of which were fursuiters. That's about 23% of the attendees. This looks like much more than that.
I don't think this is gonna work, guys.
Just ask someone if they know Wesley.
Okay, what? I'm no expert, but I highly doubt that this is how real investigators would gather information pertaining to a murder victim if this were real. Not to mention she's contaminating evidence. What do you think a real investigation would look like? They could just cooperate with the convention's organizers. See, when a person registers for a furry convention, they have to provide their real name, and they're given the option to provide a persona name, which many attendees fill out. And, I imagine, most conventions retain a list of all their attendees' names and other identifying information. It shouldn't be difficult to share that with investigators. No, it wouldn't be difficult at all, but I can think of at least one reason why organizers may be hesitant to do so. Some furries keep their furry identity hidden. They're still in the closet, if you will. If a convention's list of attendee names was made public, that could be a breach of privacy, and if that information has been shared with the authorities, there's no guarantee that it would never be made public. Granted, I've never worked with any sort of convention, and I probably know even less about how police investigations are actually conducted, so there's every possibility that I'm wrong about this. I realize that this particular inaccuracy pertains more towards how police investigations are conducted than towards furries. I think this sequence may give the impression that the furry community is so insular that everyone in it, including convention organizers, would refuse to cooperate with such an investigation. Now, yes, the furry community has been somewhat insular in years past, but I think that's mostly been in response to bad press the fandom has gotten from the media. Generally speaking, though, other than the exception I mentioned earlier, I don't see why most furry conventions wouldn't be willing to cooperate with such an investigation. But it's also important to remember that this is just a show, and having Chloe put on a fursuit to run around a furry convention makes for better television than having a scene where she talks to convention organizers.
Pardon me. Do you know anyone named Wesley? Yeah, definitely not sure this is gonna work.
I'm guessing that the dolphin just sprayed water at Chloe, but spraying water at a furry convention is not a great idea because even plain old water can still damage some fursuits. Some fursuits use materials that will be ruined if they get wet, they may have paint that will run, or they may have electronics. Even the eyes in my own fursuit head can't get wet because the paint will run. Humorous as I personally find this scene, it's not entirely accurate to what is allowed at a furry convention. You're not even gonna mention that's a mascot-style costume? Not this time, Sam. They've got enough real fursuiters in the scenes at the convention that I'm willing to look it over. They've made a reasonable effort with the costumes.
Excuse me, do you know anyone named Wesley?
Oh no, I ain't getting anywhere near that drop.
Hey, what are you doing?
Okay, wow! That is some Mari level brawling! I know furry drama can get heated at times, but I don't think I've ever heard of a knockdown, drag-out fight in the middle of a convention. Then again, we do have to remember that much like the fanciful investigation technique that put Chloe there in the first place, this is just a show, and most furry drama doesn't come to blows like this. Given how intense this particular furry drama is, I don't blame that wolf guy for not wanting anything to do with it. Extreme conflicts like this often get widespread coverage throughout the furry community over social media, so maybe he already knew about it and wanted nothing to do with it. Or at least that's my pet theory as to why that dude responded the way he did.
Look, we get it. Jealousy can make people do crazy things. Whoever this Wesley is, he's obviously important to you, important enough to leave threatening messages, and who knows what else.
Wesley isn't a guy. He's my fursona.
Huh?
Wesley Wolf is my OC. Original character. And Beth completely copied it.
Of course it would come to blows over someone's fursona getting stolen. Is there really that much drama about fursonas being stolen? I guess you could say so. So here's a broad overview from the way I understand it. Art theft is when artwork has been traced or heavily copied, when the original artist has been improperly credited, or when someone claims that someone else's artwork is their own. More nebulously, it can also refer to when someone's original character is used without the creator's permission. Well, people can have the same idea, can't they? They can, and given the sheer volume of art that is created within the furry community, coincidences are bound to happen. It's just a numbers game at this point. Coincidences are one thing, but outright copying another person's persona is a problem because personas are considered to be uniquely individual representations of oneself. It's not just taking credit for work they didn't do, but my understanding is that it can, in a loose sense, be a form of identity theft. In this case, Beth running around in a costume that represents Iris's persona, Wesley, may lead people to believe that it's not Beth in the costume, but Iris. So Beth didn't actually steal the suit from Iris. Right. Iris claims that Beth copied her persona, presumably when Beth made or commissioned a fursuit to be made of Wesley.
So Beth stole from you. That's still motive for murder.
No. I tried reasoning with Beth the very first night of the convention, but she denied stealing Wesley. It was infuriating. I was upset. Yes. I even threw ketchup on her.
Do you think Beth could have pressed charges for property damage? I don't know the law that well, but I doubt it. I think the ketchup would have needed to have caused lasting, irreparable damage to the suit, even if Beth had made a reasonable effort to clean it up. Now, I don't know about the rest of the furry community, but I would consider throwing ketchup at a fursuiter to be just as bad, if not worse, than getting into a physical altercation with the suitor.
Well, where were you this morning at 10 a.m.?
I was at the convention, leading a seminar on building your fursona's backstory.
Is that a thing?
How would I know? I'm a normie. Normal person. Totally normal.
Right.
To answer the question raised in this scene, seminars and discussion panels like that are fairly commonplace at furry conventions, though not all of them are about furry-related topics. Heck, I once saw a panel scheduled in the morning that was all about coffee. Seems like Ella's thrown a bit of shade at furries, though. I'm gonna have to disagree with you on that, Sam. I see where you're coming from, though. Ella's response gives the implication that furry is not a normal thing, and frankly, I don't disagree. Furry is not a very common hobby for people to have, thus a lot of people are going to be unfamiliar with it, and there's nothing weirder than the unknown. Don't believe me? Go explore our deep oceans. Given the context that Ella feels that she has to hide the fact that she can talk to ghosts, I think she likely said this in an attempt to maintain the facade of her own normalcy. Maybe not the nicest thing to say in front of a furry, but we've heard worse. That's all for the furry stuff in this episode of Lucifer, but I'm not going to tell you how it ends. If you want to watch it for yourself, it's available for streaming on Netflix at the time that I'm making this video. This particular episode, called Boo Normal, can be found towards the end of Season 3. Let's take a look at those review stats. Information accuracy is 69%, and the spirit is 100%, giving us an average of 85%. And now time for my thoughts. This episode of Lucifer did a fantastic job of portraying furries in a tasteful manner. Yes, the sex misconception is like the very first thing mentioned about furries, but it's done in a way that still remains respectful, if not awkwardly relatable for a lot of furries. And then that's it as far as sex is concerned. It's not played up for humor or shock value. When Chloe is running around the furry convention, there aren't any fur piles going on, nobody's suggestively rubbing on anybody else. The extras are just acting like real furries would at a convention. Heck, look at these two coming in for a hug. That's what you would see at a furry convention. Beth and Iris's fursuits appear to be custom made, probably especially for this show. I honestly think these suits wouldn't look out of place at a real furry convention. These aren't just mass-produced mascot-style costumes, but they're also not from any fursuit maker that I recognize. In any case, it's the DIY spirit that I truly respect for these fursuits. But it doesn't stop there. This show actually pushes the envelope when it comes to how it portrays furries, at least compared to what I would expect from a show like this. They're not afraid to use niche terminology like OC, and they even had a dispute over a copied persona serving as the basis for a potential motive for murder. I was genuinely surprised that they considered that as a motive. And yet throughout all of this, none of the other characters make any snide remarks or crack jokes at the furry's expense. Really, most of the things I see wrong with this episode of Lucifer are more nitpicky in nature than anything truly harmful. Like what, Abby? Like all those sewing supplies, and yet there's no brush? The ketchup should have been taken more seriously. If Beth was a real-world furry, she would have cleaned it from her suit right away. Iris, being a fursuit owner herself, should have known better than to throw ketchup on another fursuiter. Or at least she could have shown some remorse when she admitted to doing it. Overrepresentation of fursuiters at a furry convention? I think most furry conventions would likely be willing to cooperate with an investigation like the one portrayed in the episode. Spraying water at a fursuiter is not a good idea because it could damage their suit. I've never seen furry drama come to blows like that, but I'm not saying it can't happen. When Chloe takes off the fursuit head, you can hear a Velcro sound effect. To my knowledge, fursuit heads generally aren't affixed to the body of the costume. Like that, Sam. Things that may be inaccurate, but are ultimately not harmful towards furries. I see. But there is one last thing that's been nagging at me. This episode feels oddly familiar. Why the heck is that? I'm gonna check the credits real quick. Oh, yep, that explains it. Why? Who is that? He was an executive producer on the Furry CSI episode. Really? Yup. Maybe this is a way of atoning for CSI? This episode was definitely a step in the right direction, but I highly doubt it was created for that reason. In any case, it wouldn't even come close to making up for it. Why not? It's really positive. Yeah, but it's also not being directly pumped into 30 million homes like the CSI episode was. Good point. Even if this episode of Lucifer did get the same coverage as the CSI episode, I think the damage has already been done. While it is a definitive step in the right direction, this episode alone is not going to undo that damage. But I think if more media portrayals are willing to take that same step for themselves, then we're gonna be alright. Well, that's it for today's episode of Furries in the Media. Have fun, stay awesome, bye-bye! You still owe me for that bet, Abergwine. Alright, here you... Damn it! I don't have any cash!
Are you sure you don't have something else you'd be willing to part with?
Nope, I'm good, thanks! That's why you don't make a deal with the devil.